big.
I won't call on.
Oh, gosh. This is a big step for me.
About him calling you?
Don't bite, don't worry.
No, you weren't here when I sat down, so you
Oh,
didn't see it coming.
No. Guys, I thought I could sneak in. I'm gonna leave.
It's all good.
Ready? Alrighty. Welcome to the Johnson County Library's 2024 Writers Conference. If you have questions, look for a staff member in a pink shirt. If a session's full or it's already started, please don't enter. There are plenty of come and go options for you throughout the whole library. And then we are grateful to the Joan Berkeley Writers Fund, administered by the Johnson County Library Foundation, for their ongoing financial support of all of our writing programs. My name is Ashley Fick, and I am a program coordinator at the Johnson County Library. Today's program is part of our 9th annual Writers Conference. Check it out on our For Writers page for more information about writing contests, the blog, and other resources and events. If you tag us today on social media, don't forget to include the hashtag Joko Writes. Sorry, that sounded funny to me. There will be time at the end for questions or questions throughout, but if you do ask a question, make sure you have a microphone because we are live streaming, so that makes it so that the audience can hear what your question was. So with that, we are excited to have with us Greg Neri. Greg Neri is the Michael L. Prince and Coretta Scott King award-winning author of books such as Yummy, The Last Days of the Southside Shorty, and Ghetto Cowboy, which has been made into the movie Concrete Cowboy, starring Idris Elba. His books have been translated into multiple languages in over 25 countries. They include My Antarctica, Safe Passage, The Collectors, True and Nellie, Grand Theft Horse, Christo and Jean-Claude Wrap the World, Hello, I'm Johnny Cash, and Chess Rumble. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg Neri for Writing Without Thinking.
Hello. How many people were at my morning session today? Oh, good. So we were talking about being an intuitive writer. So this is an intuitive workshop in that I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it's going to happen, so it's good. The other thing I was talking about this morning was stories just falling into my lap from out of the sky. I never know when the next thing is going. So after we did that session, I got a call from a producer friend of mine that I worked on the Antarctic project, and she was like, would you be interested in doing a project that would take you both to the south side of Chicago, which I've done a couple of books, and North Africa in search of this dinosaur that's just been discovered, and working with young people both in south side of Chicago and in North Africa. And I was like, yes. So I have, one of my things in life is to say yes to unexpected opportunities that fall into your lap, even if you don't quite know anything about it or exactly what's going to happen. And so I was like, yes, let's explore that. There's a lot of interesting elements at play in there that kind of combine a lot of different aspects of my writing and filmmaking. And so, you just never know what's going to happen. But this afternoon we are talking about what I like to call the art of seeing versus looking. And to me the difference is, I'm sure you've been to a concert and somebody is watching the whole concert through their phone or recording it instead of the actual live thing that's right in front of them. Or maybe walking through a museum. Like literally, I was in Los Angeles last week. We were at this beautiful museum, and I'm right behind people who are literally just walking the whole time with their phone, like doing this, and not even really stopping to look, but almost just like recording it. Maybe they'll look at it later, but probably not. And it's like, what's the thinking there? You've come all this way, but you're not really seeing. You might be looking physically, but you're not seeing it. And I was taken back. I used to be a painter. And painting is when I first started thinking about this idea of seeing versus looking, because, you might think, okay, you're going to paint a sunset. Yeah, the sky is blue, the sun is red, the sand is yellow. What's the big deal? But when you actually have to physically break it down and you're actually looking at it, you see like the hundreds of other colors and elements that are actually at play to give you the illusion that this is what the color is, but it's actually much more complex and much more detailed. And plus, when you physically have to paint something, you really start looking at it. Like a table is not just a table. Like you actually have to see how it's constructed and where the shadows lay and if it's on wheels or not. And so all these things you don't really notice when you just walk into a room. So I just wanted to start. I want everybody to close their eyes for a minute. Just close your eyes. Now, who can tell me what colors are on the floor? What colors? And what is the floor? Like, if you were to describe the floor, can anybody just say out loud anything that they remember from having walked in? Like, did anyone actually notice what the floor looked like?
Industrial carpet tiles.
Okay, tiles, good, interesting. Colors, any colors? Yes, just call it out. Okay, good. Any like primary colors popped out? Okay, yes. So, and then does anybody remember what colors the walls are? Okay, okay. And what about the ceiling? Is there anything? Yes. And I'm trying to see if there's anything odd in this room, but there usually is. Okay, you can open your eyes. Actually, look at the floor. Yes, lots of interesting colors in this floor, actually. So a lot of reds and yellows and oranges and blues and greens, and then subtler versions of those. And the wall's kind of a turquoise blue. If you had to actually paint that, it would be an interesting combination. Naples yellow, I know that. So, a lot of times if I go into a school and I'm in a classroom that these kids have literally been in every single day for the entire year, and I do that exercise with them, like almost nobody can describe what the floor looks like, what the ceiling looks like, or there's there's a can of tennis balls sitting on top of this shelf, like, why is that there, or, just like odd little details. And so when I write a book, what it does is gives me permission to see things. And so this morning I was talking about the importance of going on location to, wherever your story is taking place, because you can read all you want about a place, but you can't really feel what it's like to be there until you're physically standing there, and until you can describe, how the light of the sky is. And light is different everywhere you go, like how the sun hits the buildings, the big colors that pop out for a place, the smells that you smell, the sounds that you hear. Like all these elements are going to bring details into a story that you can't really just make up, because when you make up those details, they're very generic. And if you're in a place and you capture that reality, people who live there will know it, and the people who don't live there, who read your stuff, it will ring of authenticity, even if they have no idea what that real place is actually like. So we're going to do a little bit of experimenting today. And what we're going to do is we're going to build a little scene. And each time we're going to add a different layer to it. And so the first thing, and really it's building towards this idea of, I like to challenge people to write the story like as if you're telling it to a blind person. Like you have to describe it in every kind of sense that a blind person could feel it and see it. And any reader should, like when they read a scene, they should be able to smell that place, to hear the sounds that are happening around them in that place, to feel the textures of that place. So we're going to play around a little bit with those elements, see if we can build a scene from scratch. So what I want to do is just do a very simple exercise at first. And I want you to imagine you're writing almost like a radio play, a little radio piece. And it's a very simple scene. And I'm going to say you're the main character in the scene. And you're lost in some unknown place. And you need to figure out how to get out of there or get to wherever you need to go. There's one other person in this place. And you're not sure, there's something off about this person. You're not sure about them, if it's safe to approach them or whatever. And it's also night. And so I want you to just do a little one-page thing. It doesn't have to be good, so don't use good as a criteria for this writing. It's just two characters in an empty place at night, and you need to figure out how to get out of this place. So we're just going to take 5 minutes, and don't think too much about it. Don't overthink it. We're just talking primarily about dialogue here. Just like how are you going to put, and you could put a little description, setting, but just like, two people alone, almost like it's a play, but no other details other than the dialogue. So just take 5 minutes, write out a little scene for yourself. No criteria other than that. Okay. Put your pens down. Now, I want you to close your eyes again. And I want you to listen. And I want you to smell. Breathe in. What kind of sounds are we hearing? If you were to describe this room from a sound perspective, anything you might add? Hmm?
Breathing.
Breathing, yes.
And cat clicks.
Hmm.
The projector.
Mm-hmm. What about smells? Any kind of smells? Mm. Now, if you didn't think about it, you might describe this room as just a quiet room. It's pretty quiet in here. But if you really focus on it, you start to pick up all these subtleties, you know, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the lights or projector. Very, 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 subtle smells. And then I would add to that, you start talking about touch, the tactile feeling of your feet on this carpet or on the table, what the table feels like or what your chair feels like all these subtle elements. All right, you can open your eyes again. Now, we're going to take that scene, you're going to turn the page, you're going to write that little scenelet again, only this time without dialogue. And this time you're focusing just on the senses of sound, smell, and touch. So what you're trying for is to capture the feeling, not only the feeling of this place, but maybe the emotional feeling of your character, your main character, you. Like if you're a little bit worried or scared in this scene, different elements are going to pop out versus if you're like grateful and happy to see somebody or whatever. So just try to set that scene up without the dialogue, but just describing how you're feeling and what you're picking up on in terms of sound, in terms of smell, and in terms of touch. And then after that, we're going to start to marry the two together.
Not what you see, just sound, smell, and touch.
Yeah. Just, give it a try. But how you're sensing this world, whether it adds to your fear, to your feeling of isolation, or anything like that, just using the senses that you experience at this moment in your scene. Okay. So the interesting thing about using these senses in writing is that it can definitely affect, how you portray a character, because depending on our emotions at a given time, we're picking up on very specific things related to those emotions. So if you're scared, like any little sudden sound or something is going to jump out, or things that you don't quite know what they are going to cause you to worry. Tactile stuff, your palms might start sweating, or you feel the hairs raise on the back of your neck, these kinds of things. And we all have had moments of kind of sense memory where you smell something or you hear a song and suddenly you're transported back, 30 years ago to something you haven't thought about in 30 years, and suddenly, like, boom. And it could be something, strange, like the smell of wet cardboard or something, and suddenly you're transported back. And figuring out what your character's smell is like in this story, the things that are going to transport them back to a moment in time, really adds layers and depth to a specific scene, and it's really a nice device to play with. So now we're going to think about character in terms of physicality and, how they carry themselves. What is their essence? And I always think of, characters maybe spirit animal, like they move, they move like a crab or something, and their eyes are always darting about, or, like trying to figure out what animal your character might be and how you can bring some of that characteristics of the animal into how you portray that character. How they move, how they walk, how they talk. Do they talk a lot and say nothing? Do they say very little but say a lot? Do they talk slowly? Do they talk very quickly? What kinds of words they use? What kind of emphasis and, dialect they hit? Their kind of speech patterns. So one thing I didn't know, I have an ear for dialect, and part of it is like almost like being an actor. And when you go to a place and you spend time there, I do it totally unconsciously, but I start to pick up the accent, and especially if it's like, I spent 6 weeks in Australia, and I'm just talking like an Aussie, and suddenly, and it's like, and also I figured out, like, sometimes if I'm really rural, they had a hard time understanding my accent, which I'm like, what accent? But as soon as I start talking, like an Aussie or like a Kiwi, they could understand me. So, and that was kind of interesting. So like, absorbing the little ebbs and flows of how people talk from a region really helps capture a place. But mostly how they carry themselves, how they move, really focus on that. So now I want you to revisit this scene again. This time, no dialogue, no senses, other than you're going to talk about the things that you feel in your body at this moment. You're always going to notice certain things that are happening in your body at a given moment, depending on what's going on around you. And also what you notice about this other character in this scene, how they, what is their body language telling you? What sense are they giving off? What is the vibe? What is that spirit animal that's coming from this character, and how it's making you feel in this moment? So it's all about the physicality, your physicality, and the physicality of the other person in this scene. So it's almost like it's going to be a non-dialogue, just kind of everything's happening in your head, feeling it and reacting to what you're seeing. So we'll do that. Oh, wait till they kick us out of it. Yeah. Okay. So, we're going to do one more exercise, but first, I'm curious, like, if doing these very simple exercises, if you have any observations about it, or if it makes you think a little differently about things that you've done or the way you write about things. Anything pop out, like anyone want to share? Yeah.
Right. When you're trying to get that,
He's just,
I don't really want to do that. When you're trying to get a character description or a description, descriptive writing of a place or a character, doing these pieces of it makes it easier than trying to think about doing the whole thing at once.
yeah, so sometimes it could free you up if you're like stuck. Just focusing on details can kind of get you going because it kind of puts you there in the place a little easier. Anybody else? Yeah.
So because it was in 3 parts, it took my story from one place to another. Had I continued in that one direction, it would have gone some way. But when you asked me to think about what you, senses,
Yeah.
what you saw, smelled, oh, let me change it this way. And it went in some direction, and then putting the character in brought in a third dimension that I wouldn't have gone. So it was very zigzag pattern.
Yeah.
And it gave I think, a nice flavor to it that otherwise would have been pretty bland because it would be a very straightforward linear progression of
Right,
my
right.
idea.
Right. You want to?
Of the aspects of the writing, not only on the theme maybe, but also the character, like you would say, and also the tone and environment. It also helped me to add on more pages to my
Yeah.
book because I
There you
can
go.
have more space also to make it more intriguing or
Right.
more mystery to it.
Did anybody feel like, oh, I don't really use this element when I write? Or yeah, you wanna?
I did feel like that. And when I noticed that, at first I kind of thought I had filled in the picture, but then when I had to choose a different emotion or whatever,
Right.
it filled it in some more, and it reminded me of, like a I'm not sure if the word cinematic,
Yeah,
but like it shows you different pictures through the story, and
Yeah.
it just makes it more interesting.
okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
It made me wonder a little bit if this approach should be tempered. Like, so I could write several pages here,
Right.
and it's good stuff, but at the same time, I wonder, in the grand scheme of an entire story, should this be reserved for
Yes.
special scenes or like poignant scenes? Instead of, because like if I do this to every single new
Right.
place my character visits, it's going to be kind of sensory overload almost, or
Right,
the
right.
plot's really going to drag. So do you have any thoughts on that? Like, hey, this is a
Yeah,
simple device to use.
that's a good observation. Like picking certain key emotional moments to pull out certain senses, and you gotta kind of feel it. What's good? Like if you're setting up a new location, a new scene that's really different than the previous scenes you've been in, like how do you capture that world? Like what is too much description versus, some people can write a lot of physical description, but you don't really get a sense of the place. And other writers can do something very spare and capture a place or a person. Like some writers have a real talent for capturing the essence of a new character they're introducing with like just one key physical element. And yeah, part of it is like playing around with it and finding like what is that element, what is that sound that's key to that scene or that feeling, or is it the stickiness of the air or the heat coming off of the build, something that's going to elevate whatever emotions that character is feeling. So the point of the exercise is just because we write about these things a lot and we don't really think about what we're doing necessarily. I mean, we do think a lot about plotting and all this stuff, but just like those details that add layers to emotion are really important to capturing and putting the reader in that place, in that moment, with that character. And yes, you can do it with very few words. Like, you don't need a whole page description to set up a scene. And in fact, my friend just told me, like, last week, it's like, yeah, you use very little description when you do go to a new scene, but you're always picking like one thing that kind of sets up the feeling of that place or that person or that thing. And it wasn't like a conscious decision, but I don't like to just, do lines and lines and lines of description, because that's just like physicality. It doesn't really give you the essence of the place or what's happening there. So yeah, I like to write very spare, stripped down. Other people can do it beautifully and have pages of description, but again, it's just like how you write and how you see things or feel things, it's going to come out different, but just being aware of what's going on. Yeah. You want that?
So when I was writing this, the first part of it with just the dialogue, I realized that I was already going through all of the feelings, all of the emotions as I was doing the dialogue. So as I was writing these other steps, other parts of it, it just felt like I was repeating myself. And so I had to go back and be like, okay, am I writing something that I've already written? But it was just, I was already going through that process already.
Yes.
But I think it's like a really good way of breaking down the process and making it to where we're more conscious of each part of that.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I notice, when I travel to a new place, especially if it's exotic and really different than, my regular life, you really notice things a lot more. You notice the smells, you notice, whoops. You notice the smells, you notice the light and how it plays and the colors and how people talk but when it comes to like where we live, we tend to kind of skip over all that stuff. So if I asked you, and maybe I will, ask you about this place that you all live in, that I'm not from here, how would you capture the essence of that place and that world? Like, what are the smells and the colors and the feelings and sounds that resonate, that make up this place? You really have to think about it, because you're so used to it, you kind of stop seeing what's around you. And it really takes a conscious effort to really see, your everyday world. I did a book about the artists Christo and Jean-Claude, and, they're famous for wrapping, they started wrapping everyday objects we see in our everyday life, like a bottle or, a chair or a table, things that we give no thought to. But as soon as they wrap it, it suddenly becomes a focus and becomes an object of mystery. And people are like, oh, what is that? It looks like a chair. It's not necessarily a chair. It looks like a chair. It could be other things made up to have the shape of a chair. You don't know that. And going to bigger things like wrapping the Pont Neuf Bridge in Paris, something people, hundreds of thousands of people cross every single day and don't give a second thought to. Suddenly they wrap it, it becomes the object of focus and attention and discussion, and people are really looking at it and looking at the history and feeling it and having all kinds of opinions about it. And so, and he had this saying, concealing to reveal, like we don't notice things until we focus on it and change like one element of it. And part of a story, if you think about it, is like, you know, an everyday life going along until one thing changes, right? One thing throws a character off their normal course. And the story is really of like what that new journey is and where it's going and how it's going to end, and where it's going to take that character that they wouldn't have gone to on their regular life trajectory. Okay, so what I want to do now is take all three of those things and try to put them all together. But don't like, I'm not talking about cutting and pasting. I'm talking about, I talked about earlier, I've been stuck on a book and had written so many versions of it and was just like overthinking it and getting crazy. And I just threw everything away and gave myself like 9 days to write the whole thing from scratch. Just like forget everything I know. It's in my body. It's in my brain. I know it without thinking about it. So I'm just going to like, so I want you to do that. I want you to just like, without looking at what you wrote already, because you know what you wrote, write that little scenelet now using, you know, all the senses, using the dialogue, using the personification of the character, like, you know, describing the feel and vibe of that character and how they comport themselves. And just try doing it fresh, but using all those elements in play with each other and see what happens. Just have fun with it. Okay. So I'm curious how you felt about this pass versus if I had just told you in the beginning to write this scene, but not given you any parameters of how you're going to write it or break it down. Like, how different do you think it would be as opposed to this version? Any thoughts? Observations? Yes.
I was just thinking that my original would be very flat. And so this one is like you said, like adding depths to it because it's like immersing yourself into something instead of just speaking about it. I think I've covered, I've been pretty good about covering different, feelings and that sort of thing, but the feelings weren't the depth of these. It's like this brings you down into a level that is like experience as opposed to it's just deeper. I don't know how to describe it, I guess, so.
And also, if you felt like they kind of came together naturally now that you're aware of it, or was it a little bit harder because now you were aware of everything?
I think because you said it was night, it made it a scary story right off the bat.
Okay.
I got a little distracted.
Because there are too many elements to play with? Or?
Well, in a good way, but
Yeah.
each time I found something else.
Right.
And so the story, like you said, kind of happened as a result in a way that it didn't happen before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I write so much like military stories, and it's I never thought about personalizing, each area that I go into like I
Right.
did, and I think because we layered it on, that you become more cognizant of it,
Right.
and then once you do that, then it becomes part of what you're doing.
Yes.
And that was very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, once you're kind of aware of it, hopefully it becomes more natural and it just becomes a thing you do because you put yourself into the scene more and you're more aware of like the feeling of everything that's going on around you. Yeah.
For me, my characters in the first scene felt like they had a lot of what the last scene had, but it just was flatter, more 2D. In the
Right.
last scene, they were more confident in like the choice of words that I used, felt more direct to who they are after I fleshed out those details that weren't so fleshed out the first run around, which is really cool to see. Thank you.
Anybody else? Does it make you think any differently about how you've been writing, or like when you go back to that thing you've been writing, like, oh, I'm going to add this element to it or anything like that? For me, it's just like, well, actually, I'm going to issue this challenge to you. When you go back home tonight, I want you to spend the next 24 hours really thinking about where you live as a place for a story you're writing, and really see it the way it is, and the way you probably don't even think about because you've been there for however long you've been there. Like, really listen to the sounds that are happening around you, the smells that are happening around you, the tactile things around you, and just really focus on seeing and using all your senses to experience your world for the next 24 hours, and see if how much you notice that you never noticed before, because there are all kinds of things happening around you. I mean, a lot of times you sit in your backyard or whatever, on the balcony or whatever, you're thinking about other things, you're doing something else. But if you just sat there with nothing to do, no screen to look at, nothing to read, and you just like sit there and absorb it, you start hearing all kinds of sounds that are happening, 3 blocks away, or this thing is being built over there, and, just like little details that don't necessarily matter, but matter to you because you're a writer. And you're going to pick up on those things now and be observant in life. So I thought we could open it up a little bit more. Yeah, we could throw it open more and just talk about things that you're working on in terms of, issues you might be having writing. If there's anything, you're struggling with, any elements of your writing you're struggling with, you want to talk about. We can throw it open a little bit if you want. If anyone's, you don't have to be shy. Anybody writing on something right now that they're having issues with or, not sure about? Yes.
I'm working on a middle grade, surprised me. I'm working on a middle grade story that is a mystery, and I shared it with my writing group, and they said it's too scary for middle grade. So since that's your genre,
Yes.
where would you put the line for too scary?
If you've had kids, first of all, they love being scared. And, even if they're like, it's scary. By middle grade, they're like ready. Now there's a difference between like psychologically scary versus like horror, gore kind of stuff, which you can, temper. But it's just as far as like emotional scares. I've read all kinds of great books, and I've talked to librarians, and they're number one with a bullet, like the scary books. Like, where are the scary books? So I would say I wouldn't worry about that too much. If you're talking about gore or violence, then there are things you can temper that or play it in a certain way. And I'm always a fan of not being obvious. Like, sound is much more scarier than seeing something. Like, so monster, is always scarier in the dark, in the shadows, than if you shine the light on them. You could see exactly what they are. Not as good. So I always think of like Jaws, how much time that shark had actually on screen, like tiny. But the impact that shark had on the entire story is all psychological, like scary. So I wouldn't worry too much about being too scary. Yeah.
I tend to be more analytical and detailed when I write.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have some ideas for helping me bring in more emotion to my writing?
Like analytical meaning you're just describing something to describe it. I mean, you're like being very specific about it, or?
Yeah, I think that's not a problem, the specificity, if that's the right word. It's more like trying to get the writer to connect emotionally
Right.
on a level with me, instead of like, here's what the wall looked like, here's
Right,
what
right.
the carpet looked like.
Yeah.
What was the feeling in the room?
Right. Yeah, again, it's picking those certain details. Like, you don't have to describe me the whole room, but depending on the emotions that are going on with the character, like if they've been told to wait in this room, and like some big decision is going to be made, and the only sound is like that ticking clock, you're just waiting for that axe to fall or whatever. A ticking clock is totally innocuous, but in that moment has big psychological, because you're just waiting, and the hum of the fluorescent lights, and gives like a feeling of dread in the room, and these, it might be ugly colored walls, there might be a painting on the wall that you never notice, but it's kind of horrifying or something. It's just like picking those moments that are going to support the emotion of the scene are the ones worth getting into, and not worrying about every single 4 walls, and there's this many windows, and there's this door, and this color, and this. So try to find one thing to focus on and play that out, maybe. What else? I know you want to say something. Yeah, you must have a question about something.
Well, I think I think the exercise was good for me in the sense that your initial brief was very overwhelming to start writing. And then once you started putting in parameters, it gave a context.
Right,
and
right.
those boundaries were a lot more manageable for me to write in. So the writing became more fluid and I actually was able to write something. Whereas initially when you just said it's night and this,
Right.
I'd be like, oh gosh, where do I start?
Well, that's an interesting observation because sometimes, you sit down and depending on what's going on with you, you might overwhelm yourself like where do I start, or where there's like so much, like how do you find your spot to get in? And sometimes giving yourself parameters instead of like, I'm going to write a novel and here's page 1, chapter 1, soon. It's like, okay, I'm just going to write a scene just to explore. And the object of the scene is just to explore this character so I get to know this character. So I'm going to write a scene about this character. It's not going to even be in the book or the story, but it's going to help me understand who this person is and see how they might behave in this other kind of situation. Or, just giving yourself a little exercises really can help take the pressure off of like, instead of you're doing this, giant thing, it's like, bring it small, personal, like in giving yourself little exercises. This, particularly if you feel stuck on anything, these little things can help kind of break the ice a little bit and just kind of get you moving. Because once you start moving, then other ideas start to fall into place. But if you're stuck, it's just like that lack of mobility really keeps you from momentum, moving forward. And to me, that's what it's all. As long as you're moving, it doesn't matter that you're writing something that's not going to be in the book. It's going to be in the book in one way or another. Because if you figure out the psychology of that character or how that character carries themselves, then that element is going to be in there. So, like, nothing is wasted. Everything is fodder for something else. Yes.
So I have primarily written genealogy and family history stuff. And so sometimes it's pretty dry, I've been able to do a lot of interviews with, some people who were older members of my family.
Right.
So that has been good. But I was noticing that a lot of your books seem to be factual, based on real stories. But is there a way that, say I'm writing family history, and I do want to pass that on, but to make it more interesting, is there some combination of fact and fiction
absolutely.
that you can, or have you worked that into your stories?
I wrote a book about the childhood friendship between Simon and Garfunkel, and which takes place in Queens in New York, a Jewish community. And I got a letter or email from somebody not too long ago, and they were just like, so, I mean, first of all, they thought I was Jewish and lived in Queens, and because how could you write this thing? And that I had captured that very specific world in the 1950s, Queens, Kew Gardens, and really that is just like taking all this, but going back in time to find it instead of like it's being in the present. So you're looking for, if you're talking to somebody who was there at that time, definitely what you're looking for is the flavors that were going on, how people dressed, particularly the kind of attitudes that was going on at that time, the kind of spirit in the air. There's like all these details that are really rich that are probably very different than today now. and can really build the flavor up or kind of bring it alive. And so, yeah, bringing all those elements, the sounds, if you're writing particularly, I'm writing something that takes place in the late 1800s, and there are all the sounds of like horse carriages and, there's the newspaper boys, yelling out the headlines, and, it's a down and out place, so there's lots of fighting going on in the streets and just all kinds of juicy elements that bring it to life. And so, you can definitely get stuff from people who were there, but you can also get things from other writers who have written about that time period or that city at that time. So kind of researching even outside of the specifics of a family, and just to bring some of those details in so anybody who reads it now can really kind of feel what it was like back then. And, particularly I write for young people, and, as as students I've worked with refer to the year 2000 as the turn of the century. And, my daughter would say the 90s, the horse and buggy days. It's like recently can be a period piece, and every detail is like interesting and unusual to somebody who didn't experience even stuff that's obvious to us, And I'm always amused. I like talking to young people just to ask them what they know. Like, do you know what this is? Do you know what this is? And stuff that's totally obvious to you. Like, I've seen kids try to use a rotary phone and not know that it slides. They're trying to poke the number. Or I had a kid who was playing with a typewriter and wanted to know how to change the font, so like all kinds of stuff. As soon as you get back 20 years, it's like a whole new world. And if you go back 100 years, that's like a real new world. And then 200 years, something totally different. So finding not only the specifics of your story, but the bigger thing to capture a time and a place, and, and how focusing on the differences, and how communities felt different, or how families acted different in terms of maybe not being scattered, but being like you have generations of families all living in one place a lot of times, and or families intermarrying, like all kinds of dynamics going on. And, of course, every family has mysteries and things that were not talked about, and finding those details are like, ooh, the good stuff. So, like, if you think of it as a story more than like you just recording history, I always say, if I'm doing nonfiction, I'm not writing a history book. That's almost like I'll write that out on a piece of paper in front of me, tape it on the wall. This is not a history book. This is a living document. So I'm going to put the reader there at this time in this place, and they're going to feel it and understand it and be a part of it. And if you do your job, then they're just totally time traveling at that point. Anybody else? Anything? You talk about anything. It's all good. Yes.
In writing history, like 100 years ago, it's real helpful to get a Sears catalog. Mm-hmm. They have reprints of the catalogs, and then you can find out that they used laudanum for headaches.
Yes.
And liver pills and corsets, and
yeah.
So it helps round out the story.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm working on a story. It takes place in 1976, so I'm like not only finding stuff online, but ordering stuff on eBay, stuff from, maps and magazines and things yeah, all that cultural stuff that you see in magazines, newspapers, and just these artifacts can really add a lot of depth to something, especially if you're like showing it to a young person. They're like, what is it? It's like a map on paper? What? Yes.
Something important if you're writing family history is to remind everybody it's your point of view. Because I have written stories and I've had family members say, well, that wasn't my grandmother, but we were 10 years apart in the family.
Right.
So it's important going forward. It's your point of view and you have the right to write it the way you want to.
Yeah. History is recorded by those who write it, right? And it's like, and definitely there's no such thing as a truly objective, work. It's always subjective, depending. You're always picking and making choices about what you show and don't show, and how you show it, and the details you choose to provide. And that just comes with what you think is the best way to tell this particular story. But yeah, those choices are always interesting, what you choose to leave out or put in. So, yeah. If we have no questions, I'm going to let you go. But really, I want the next 24 hours. There'll be reports due on Monday. No. I really want you to think about it. In fact, if you want to, you can even do the writing exercise. Try to write about, not only the place you live in or the things, your typical route, if you take certain walks every day, if you go to work, try to break it down, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the textures, how really look at people that you encounter on your everyday life and notice, oh, they walk like a bear, or they move like a cat, or, like what is the defining characteristic of that person if they were going to be a character? How would you describe them? How would you describe, how they handle themselves physically, how they talk, and all this good stuff for writing. Just be very observant from here on out. All right. Well, thank you for coming. I hope you're having a good day, and keep writing.